Good morning and welcome to everyone. We have a few attendees dropping in here as we speak. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to the first webinar in a series of webinars on research and innovation security. This is organized by the Stockholm Center for Innovation and Research Security here at ISDP. And we hope to use these seminars to create a dialogue and exchange on research and innovation. We will start today with two Swedish speakers, but we hope to include speakers from North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Middle East, etc. Trying to see if you can create a better conceptual understanding of research and innovation security. And what we see is, when you talk about research and innovation security, it's normally seen as a conflict between national interest and research freedom. And what we're trying to do is to look at if we can reach some sort of conclusion, how we can improve national security, but as still maintaining research freedom and academic freedom. And it's not an easy process. This is, of course, a field that is moving. And we're hoping to try to lift one of these issues and trying to get a better understanding. I mean, how do we strengthen technological sovereignty while maintaining competition that businesses so badly need, and international collaboration? Because I think it's very clear that we need that international collaboration. Whether we talk about green technology, we talk about healthcare, we talk about security issues, international cooperation will be essential, or else we lose a lot of this innovation. Trade policies, funding mechanisms, and public and private partnerships all become essential in this. But again, this is issues that different states look at differently. And of course, in the Swedish case, I think we're looking at from a individual freedom perspective to a larger extent, where other states might actually look at more from national security. And of course, this creates a bit of challenges. But today, we have two speakers going to speak about research and innovation security from a Swedish perspective, but not only from a Swedish perspective. We have Kristina Weinicka, who is going to speak from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprises. She's a legal researcher, an entrepreneur, and a very active board member. And she will, of course, bring in that sort of business perspective and how she views this issue. And then we have Albin Gaunt, the Swedish Foundation for International Cooperation in Research and Higher Education, the long name for a shorter abbreviation STINT. And he comes from before Karolinska Institutet, one of our prime medical universities, as well as the Ministry of Education. So he brings in that sort of international cooperation and research perspective. I'm going to let the two speakers just give a short overview of their different perspectives, and then we will start with discussion. And maybe, Kristina, would you like to start?
I can certainly start. Thank you for having me. And I would like to start by giving some very specific Swedish traits that makes us in Sweden having very specific experiences. Experience that others also could benefit from understanding. So experiences that we have done here that could be beneficial for others. First of all, Sweden is a rather small, trade-dependent country, and we've been so already from the working age. But that means that we have had to be trade dependent, but we have also had this neutrality for so many years that opened up collaborations and markets broadly, not only to specific parts of the world, but internationally. That is a very specific trait. Another specific trait, also linked to us being a rather small country, is that we have limited resources when it comes to people with the knowledge, and so on. And that makes collaboration extremely important. Collaboration between people, but also collaboration, academia, industry. And the fact that people within industry have formerly worked in academia, so it's their old friends that they are collaborating with, and so on, and vice versa, of course. But we have had to collaborate and build our networks because being isolated is not going to be enough. It's within the country and outside the country. Another specific trait is, of course, that if Swedish companies want to grow, if we look at the business perspective, if they want to grow, Swedish market is so small that if you want to grow, you need to go internationally, and you have to think internationally rather early, which means that we have a lot of Swedish companies having a broad international experience. And then the fourth trait is not linked to the fact that we are a small country, but it's more of who we are and how we look upon ourselves. And we often say it almost like a joke, and that is the fact that we are a country of engineers. And that gives us an approach to the world. We look upon the world as if there is always a technical solution to everything, and we approach things very much as if it is a technical solution. And I can say that even as a lawyer, my perspective is always technology can solve everything. If someone can imagine something, the engineers can solve it. Sooner or later, they are going to solve it. So those were traits that perhaps can be seen as something good, but we also have specific traits that can lead to challenges. And number one challenge, I would say that we do have a lack of understanding when it comes to knowledge-based assets, information, trade secrets, patents, copyrights, and so on. A lot of people in Sweden have difficulties understanding the value of these types of assets, have difficulties to understand how to act to preserve this kind of assets, and the difference even between these types of assets. One example could be that the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise this spring published a report comparing the IP strategies from different parts of the world. And we compared Denmark, Finland, China, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, Brazil, and Botswana. We do not have an IP strategy in Sweden. We don't have that overarching strategy. The government is discussing to have one, but we're not there yet. Another example is education on knowledge-based assets, where Japan has a specific institute regarding that, facilitating education from schools to the lifelong learning on knowledge-based assets. That institute has celebrated 100 years. We're discussing if we should have one. And what we talk about when we talk about research security is, of course, very much the knowledge, the information, and so on. But we don't really grasp that kind of assets. That also perhaps is linked to another challenge, and that is that we sometimes are somewhat naive when it comes to research security. Some years ago, and this was before the war on Ukraine, I was at a seminar, and the researcher, and the topic was research security. And a professor in a field where you normally have collaboration between academia and industry said that, oh, but that's no problem. I just want my research to be spread to as many as possible. And I was a little bit concerned because her field of research is some topics where you normally have collaboration and where the companies financing her research would probably be interested in having a patent sooner or later. And if that information just spread, then it's impossible to patent. Another challenge is that we have a principle of openness, a principle of publicity, which is there for the public sector, including academia. So it's there, but a lot of researchers don't really understand what it means, and they don't really grasp what it also could mean for research security and how to handle information. We even have a court case in Sweden where a researcher had information about his research, and other researchers wanted to get that data out. And he said, but I have promised the people being part of this research program that their information would not be spread, that it would be kept secret. But there was no specific legislation granting the secrecy. Therefore, he was supposed to share that information. He instead destroyed that data and information, and then he was sentenced in court. So that's how strong that principle of openness is. And the fourth challenge I would like to raise is a principle that we have called professor's privilege, that researchers in academia, they own the rights to their research results. And this is mainly in an act on the right to patent innovations made by employees, and then we have the professor's privilege. The consequences sometimes that universities back down and say that everything linked to knowledge-based assets, we have the professor's privilege, that's a specific researcher's problem, not the university's problem. Another thing is that principle on professor's privilege is a lot more complex than people normally grasp, and that is not always taken into concern, which actually links back to the lack of understanding on knowledge-based assets. And I'll finish there to open up for Albin.
Well, thank you very much. It's very interesting what you also say about this naivety. And of course, there's not always a case when you talk about this sort of innovation research security, people tend to think it in national security, but as you point out, it could be researchers' security, that keeping their own patents, making sure that their research is maintained with themselves. And I think that you don't have to be study, nuclear science to be to create that sort of research and innovation security. I mean, you can be a humble legal scholar, as both you and I have studying, or international relations, and if your result disappears and somebody else takes it over, you have wasted maybe years of research. So of course, when we talk about research and innovation security, it's not about the state in itself. It could be multi-layered. It could be individual researchers, it could be companies, it could be state security, but it's much more diverse than many people realize, I think.
And just to give an example, we have a court case in Sweden regarding trade secrets. And it was trade secrets within Ericsson, but it was deemed by the court that it was also of national interest, of national security. So you could say it's just the information within one company, but it was of interest for Sweden as a country.
The multi-layeredness. But Albin, I will let you give your introduction before we start. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Niklas, and thank you for pulling this seminar series together. I will be very interested in following it, and it's an honor to be the first one out. And thank you, Christina, also for very interesting reflections on opportunities and challenges. So a little bit about Stint. Stint is a private foundation that funds international cooperation in research and higher education between Swedish universities and institutions outside Europe. And that sets us really in the middle of this. And about 6 years ago, I think, Stint began to see some really problematic funding applications from individual researchers. And these problems concerned ethics and academic freedom, dual use, and that kind of thing. And we also simultaneously saw some of the broader challenges that Swedish universities face when the geopolitical environment changes so much. And because international research is becoming extremely complex, but also fragile. So therefore, we started to highlight and discuss the risks and responsibilities that are linked to international academic collaboration. And we realized early that the need for responsible internationalization is not going to go away. It's something that universities will have to discuss and think about for in the long term. And probably that they will also need support in this endeavor. Because really, there is some, let's be clear, I mean, there's some really very real hard risks in this environment. Espionage, misuse of sensitive technologies, and attempts to influence or control our research. So these are really threats that we cannot ignore, and we've seen examples over the years. And some of these issues, we can protect ourselves through regulation, and in that sense they're relatively simple, but nothing is simple here. But in this area, I would say, well, compliance with sanctions, you could fit in here, export controls, cybersecurity requirements. These are sort of digital. Either you do them or you don't, more or less. But then we have these more complex and value-laden questions like academic freedom, research integrity, proportionality, who do we trust, which data we want to share. And here, really, professional judgment becomes really essential and central. But how do you develop a professional judgment in this new environment? You can't do that overnight. It rather grows through, I guess, through experience and institutional learning and an open discussion within the academic community. And that is why we from Stint, we emphasize capacity building, dialogue, and supporting a risk culture, if you will, in higher education and research. It's not just about compliance. Another thing is that when we talk about risks and we put our focus on risks, it is extremely important not to lose sight of the research itself, what we are really out there to do. Because, as you said, Niklas, before, I mean, international collaboration is a crucial driver of excellence. Without the international collaboration, Sweden would not, and as also Christina said earlier, we would not be where we are today. And so risk management and risk response has to be proportional. We have to weigh in what we stand to lose if we don't collaborate. And often mentioned example, of course, of this is a pandemic, where international networks that already existed made it possible to respond extremely fast and to develop this working vaccine in light speed. And so when the next global crisis arises, there will be no time or even possibility to build these collaborations from scratch. They must already be there, and that's why it's so important to continue to collaborate broadly with partners that you're not so familiar with, or that you might feel a threat from. So we need to be both secure and internationally connected in a broad sense. There's not a choice between one or the other, and I think that's pretty clear for most of us. But one of the risks, sort of a meta risks maybe, is that universities, they are still quite inexperienced in dealing with these geopolitical questions and security related questions in their own operations. I mean, many universities have research into these areas, but how do you actually make this happen in your own operations? And since they still are very much building this capacity, there's a risk that they scale down international cooperation just simply because they lack the tools and competence to assess these risks. I'm not saying that it's not there, but it's really being built up at the moment. And if that happens, you know, we stand a risk of losing a lot of international cooperation, which is crucial for us, not least in the face of a next global crisis. Yeah. So that is why, as we see it, it's so important to invest even more now in international contacts and cooperation than before, because it's more difficult now. So we have to do more investments into this area. And that is pulling it all together. In our perspective, responsible internationalization, as we tend to want to call it, it should enable collaboration and not close it down. That is why we are working on this area from STINT's side, because universities will always need to balance the risks and opportunities. That is in the core of what they do. They always balance risks and opportunities, not only in this international arena, but in everything they do. So STINT's role is to help universities to continue to cooperate internationally in a way that's both open and safe. So that is our perspective on these research security issues and responsible internationalization, as we want to frame it.
So thank you very much for that introduction. There seems to be a bit of issue with the sound. If Anna can't hear me, please let me know. But one of the in the audience had a difficulty hearing my voice and a bit of Albin's voice as well. And she can hear us now. Well, what is interesting is we talk about this geopolitical situation, and we're talking about some sort of proportional response. We're talking about we stuck into a geopolitical situation where it's increasingly polarized, but at the same time we need it. I'm thinking about Europe's green transition. Let's be honest here, United States is falling behind, to say the least. There's not much investment done in green tech. Who is leading the green tech development? China. And of course, that's going to put us in in a difficult spot with United States, with all the challenges that comes in. But we need China. I think we have to realize that when it comes to the green technology development, when it comes to research and innovation. So, I mean, the importance of collaboration, and I do see I mean, I'm a strong proponent of decreasing the dependency on China. But at the same time, it has to be proportional. In some cases, we do depend on actors such as China. What is the proportional response, and how should we think, and who should make the decisions? As you said, you talked about a bit of both of you, about universities being able to, the professor's choice, etc. But an economic dependency on an authoritarian state is going to be hugely problematic, because let's make no illusions here. If you are dependent on a state like China, they will weaponize the technology. So how do we approach this extremely difficult problem? I mean, I wish I had a solution here, but I don't. I see the problem, but anybody wants to try to jump on that? The challenge between, well, dependency and maybe research and innovation security.
You can jump in, and I also want to respond to a question in the chat regarding this case on the professor who destroyed data. And it was at the time, it was quite a lot of debate, public debate in Sweden. And there's even a Wikipedia page, both in Swedish and in English. So in Swedish, the title of the Wikipedia page is Göteborgs studien om barn med DAMP, and in English, Gothenburg study of children with DAMP or DMP. On the English Wikipedia page, it does say the neutrality of this article is disputed. So you can imagine all the discussion has been about the case, but you can find all the links to the court cases and the public debate about it. But most of the legislation that led up to the court cases is still there. So just wanted to make that clear. But you can find all the information about it. And then to go back to the question you actually asked, I think that the first thing where we need to start is to have a high level of awareness. What do we have? What could be important to others? What could others do with the information that we have? I don't know if you remember, but this summer there was a big news story on solar panels. And I remember some years ago when we talked in Sweden that we were world leading in research on solar panels. And this summer, the news came out that 95% of all solar panels installed in Europe came from China. What did happen? And I think somewhere along the line, I think we have lost on how to take the step from research to actually making things come to market. So that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that perhaps we think too much in isolated projects, and researchers, they do their project and they publish their articles and then they move on. Whereas in other parts of the world, you could perhaps have longer strategies and think of what can we do with this in a longer term, because I think the example of the solar panels does tell us something on what others can do with if research field where we actually were world leading once upon a time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to chip in here and as well, and I think of course I agree with you, Christina. It's apparent that there's a problem here, and so solar panels are a very good example. But also we need to be aware that, I mean, or think about what are our sensitive areas. What is it that we absolutely want to put up barriers around? What are what is the sensitive fields for us? And because not everything that we cooperate internationally on will be misused, hopefully. So we have to also think about risks and opportunities, both in the short run, but also in the long run. And if we start collaborating on green technologies, and if that development slows down, then we will have a challenge in facing the climate crisis. So there's also that perspective. How do we weigh these opportunities and the challenges, and where do we see the risks? A risk is also the climate crisis. And this is really a difficult choice to make, and in the end, probably also a political choice, I think, because it's more or less ideological. We will have to have a lot of discussion about this, I think, weighing back and forth and balancing.
I think Albin, you're pointing to a very important thing. I think it is a political choice to a very large extent, because the green transition is, of course, a energy dependency. We're transferring, hopefully, then from a dependency on Russia towards the green tech, which there's a dependency in China. We have the climate change. So in this regard, there's good reasons to continue research, innovation, and security with China, or innovation and research with China, because the costs are extremely high. But and I think this is what we also need in the research community, and also the companies, political guidance. Where do we stand? Where can we actually collaborate? Because my fear in many of these things is that there's a lack of direction, which means that companies is not going to invest because they don't know, am I doing a wrong thing, or am I going too far? Researchers might be limited because they don't know what they're going to do. So I think we need a very clear political direction. Individual choices has to be, within the companies and academics, of course, but I think it would be necessary. As this problem grows in strength, I think we also need that sort of direction from the European level, but also from individual governments. And I see that lacking in many cases today, or maybe even being overlapping in a negative way between different governments in Europe. Because, of course, if you're a malign actor who's going to try to gain access to technology, you aim for the weakest partner. You don't go with the one with a strong sort of research and innovation protection, you go for the weak actor. So, here's something we need to get together on.
Sure. But just to complicate things a little bit further, when speaking about political decision-making when it comes to academic collaborations, that is a very sensitive area because of academic freedom. This is actually an area where I think Swedish universities stand out a little bit with their very strong focus on academic freedom at the moment. To our universities, it's particularly important that they do not hand over any sense of control over academic decision-making. And they are very wary, I think, about over-securitization and disproportionate responses to security threats. So we have that dimension as well when we do these choices about how do we cooperate and with whom and so yes, political decisions about the maybe the general direction, but in the short and medium term, maybe this is also an issue of academic freedom.
Yeah. And that comes actually to one of my questions that's probably going to be asked to every single, I mean, how can, well, Sweden in this case, serve as a role model for balancing that openness, innovation, and security for the broader European and international community? What would you think is the goodies in the bag here that we can bring out? And Christina, do you want to start on that one?
I can certainly start. One of the first things that I would like to bring to the table is, of course, that in human mankind, we have never seen a high culture coming from isolation. So the fact that Sweden does have a background of collaborating and working internationally is something very good. And also having a lot of not only research collaboration internationally, but also companies who work internationally. But I think one of the things that we need to discuss is not from the political perspective saying that you have to do this, but to have the discussion, having an environment that creates common understanding. And to give one example, compared to the protection of trade secrets within companies, because the legislation on protection of trade secrets is not that this type of information is always a trade secret. It is rather we decide that this information is of such importance that we want to keep it as a trade secret. So that you have that discussion, what is of such importance that we actually want to create protection for this information? And that is something that since we have this culture of finding consensus and discussing things, this is something that we could actually bring to the table. At the same time, we also need to understand that this can be quite difficult. And I'm going to give one example from a company where I was coming in during my time as an entrepreneur, and I was helping this company, rather big company, with their innovation strategy and also how to take their innovations to market and to protect them. And so we did this rather large project and we interviewed people within the company. And one of the questions we asked was, what is your core competence? And so we interviews one-to-one, service within the company and so on. And the problem was that we didn't get very clear answers. So we got 3 different kinds of answers. And one answer was, I don't know. And that means this company, they didn't, a lot of people, even, really high levels in the company, they couldn't describe the core competence of the company, which leads to what information is of importance. The other type of answer we got was, oh, we had a project about that, but I don't know the conclusion. And thirdly, they said, oh, I know. And they said, then it is. And then they gave totally different answers. The consequence of that is that they didn't protect anything. So one part of the company protected customer lists. One other part of the company protected, like different types of solutions. And some other part of the company protected strategies. But that means that the part of the company that protected customer lists, they didn't care about the models of calculation, for example. So in fact, they were leaking. So what we need to have as a common understanding within research projects, within universities and so on. And it's not one solution and a politician coming and saying, well, if it's a research project on life science, then you always have to do this, because that's not the reality. But people handling specific types of information, they need to have a common understanding that we protect this information and we do it because. So don't do like that company did. So you can actually learn from that. And our culture of finding this consensus is something that we actually can bring to the table, because we're quite used to reaching common understanding, but we need to understand need to do it in this perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Albin, do you have any comments?
Well, Christina's already said it, a lot of the things that I was going to add to this, but I think maybe how how Sweden can contribute to this discussion is really about the whole concept of responsible internationalization is obviously from Sweden. And that is what we mean by that is really a broader understanding of the issues that we have to face, and the need of embedding these issues into a sort of a culture within the academic community. The ability to ask questions, the need for building experience in international collaboration, so that you can tell when things are off and when you have to raise a red flag. So that's one thing. Also, at the moment, I think we are doing what Sweden is pretty good at doing, which is a sort of a whole of government coordination of these things, which we are seeing at the moment. I mean, we haven't seen the final organization of this supportive structure yet, but this is something I think that Sweden stands out in when it comes to coordination of government activities. I think also some of the universities, the bigger universities, and many of the smaller ones are really active in this space as well, developing due diligence tools and advisory groups and export control support very actively. But since we are really in the middle of this at the moment, it's difficult to say what is the most efficient way of handling these issues. But those are the things that I think you could mention as response to your question.
Excellent. Well, this morning, actually, it came out that the Swedish government is going to invest 300 million in cybersecurity protection. So that, from my perspective, that's a welcome addition. I mean, I think at least it's going to cover some of the needs, maybe not all, but there's a huge need, and we need to deal. But how can Swedish research institutions also prepare for threats like AI-enabled disinformation, digital research sabotage, or cyber attacks threatening innovation? I mean, a small organization like ISDP, I mean, we have been under constant attack from malign actors. Our homepage, for example, was closed down for 3 months a couple of months ago. But how do how do Swedish research institutions and companies prepare for this? This is a tremendous challenge, if I'm gonna connect it to today's news.
I can start there, and I'm actually going to bring it back to that we are a country of engineers. And I think it is good that we do invest in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is important. But if we look at it, if we really are going to protect the results that we have in academia, for example, we need to think of more than just the cybersecurity part. I sometimes compare, if you want to protect any types of non-physical objects, sometimes even physical objects, you need to think of this kind of stool that a milkmaid has, with 3 legs. And if you remove 1 leg, it's going to tip over. And there are 3 legs there. First of all, of course, you need to have the legislation in place so that you have a clear legislation that everybody can understand. And then you need to have the technical security in place, which is often discussed as this is what we're going to invest in when we talk about cybersecurity, firewalls, and all that types of technical solutions. And then there is this soft part, the common understanding part, having clear instructions so that everyone knows, do not click on that and that types of links, for example, or do understand how to behave in different environments and so on. And the problem with a country like Sweden, since we are a country of engineers, we often focus on the technical solution. We often focus on if we only have a technical solution that is strong enough, if we only have, if you consider it as a safe, that we have a lock that is strong enough, then everything is going to be protected. But then we don't think about the softer parts, the common understanding, the ones that makes people understand how to behave in a certain situation, and so on. And those things are really, really important. I was speaking at a seminar in Almedalen, a typical Swedish event. And when we talked about cybersecurity and how to behave, and there was another panelist coming from a company, and they said one of her most important steps in security was when she made sure that everyone was carrying their badges visibly, including top management, because they didn't used to. And that meant that it was easy for people to come in, because people, who shouldn't be there, because they didn't have the culture of you always need to carry your badge and you have to carry it visibly and in a specific way. And that is really this kind of soft things which is so important. And if we do focus on just investing in technical solution and cybersecurity, and we don't even discuss these soft issues of having this common understanding and common behavior, then we're not going to reach the level of security that we want. And especially it's going to be difficult to balance that with the openness that we actually do want. So we need to broaden the discussion, I think. Okay.
Albin, do you have any comment on?
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is certainly not my field, but still, I think universities are absolutely very aware of these threats. But it's a challenge, I think, also to work with culture at universities. I mean, researchers tend to be a little bit on the anarchistic side as well, and very sometimes and culture change within research organizations, I think, may take longer time. All the same, they are very, very important, and I think that what Christina says, it's really the way forward to build on culture. So that is my chip in there. Yeah.
Well, I think the security police would agree. I mean, I think the biggest threats there is the human factor. Don't click, don't leave your papers on your desk. If you print something, don't share it too much. But what kind of government structures would you find or to have been most effective in mitigating risk for research, innovation, security? Is there anything there we can find that, or are we developing structures that would be useful for the future?
Well, I think that if I can just start there, I think that is what something that remains to be seen, because we are in the, as I said, we are in the midst of building these structures now, and since we also it's really difficult to build and measure these kinds of structures, because we don't know what we are preventing. The point is that we prevent stuff from happening, and we haven't really seen that much that many incidents that have been public. I'm sure there are many that have not been published and that are still unknown to most of us. But so that makes it really difficult to see which measures are effective or not. But we can see that some countries have a more centralized approach, such as France, while the Netherlands, for instance, they build a central supportive hub with decision making made at universities, while Sweden maybe has a more even more decentralized approach to this, and so it remains to be seen what is effective or not.
I mean, when we look at the Europe, thinking about Europe now in particular, I mean, exactly what you point out there, that Sweden seems to have a very decentralized structure. Other countries have a much more centralized. We have different legislations. Should this be more centralized within the European Union structures, or should we? I mean, what is the best way to go forth with this? I mean, I know this is, of course, is pure speculations, and I agree with you. Prevention is always a challenge, because you never get credit when you prevent something. You only get credit when you do something that is visible. But what would you think about that? I mean, I would assume a malign actor would target the differences within Europe, where we put the different measures and how we approach things. So what is the solution to that, if there is any?
Oh, I think we have to work on all the levels, internationally, globally, on research security, but also on the regional level at the EU and nationally and at the university. So all these levels have to come together, and on the EU level, I guess, coming back to Christina's mentioned the milkmaid's stool, yeah, with legislation and technical security and culture and discussion and dialogue. I think the EU also needs to continue working on all these three parts, and which actually they are doing. So we have legislation that was developed last year. We have technical security measures in the form of websites where you can find information on and do your due diligence, and then we also have a number of conferences on the EU level coming up, where we can have the dialogue between our the countries, because, as you say, it's really important to have sort of a level playing field here as well between the European countries.
Christina?
Yes, and I would like to continue there, because I totally agree. We do see a lot of really good things happening, and we need to think of this overarching. We can't leave it to one level. We need to have these discussions in all levels. It's not enough just to have it in the international overarching level, but it's also not enough just to have it at university level. We need to have it all over. the main risk, I would say, is if we just keep discussing it at a very high policy level, where it doesn't come down to this means that you should do that or think of this today. That means that it won't have any effect. So we really need to have these meetings and conferences and discussions in everyday life as well. So it's not just overarching policy discussions, even if we also do need the overarching international discussions, and we need the discussions within the EU. And I think it's very good that the EU has taken really good measures in different parts of these issues. So we see good things happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do have the DG for Research and Innovation that is bringing out a lot of important issues. But it is, I think it's, I think what we're facing is also, yeah, it's a complicated issue, and I don't think there's a silver bullet for anything here. I mean, it's as been pointed out by both of you, it's a continuous dialogue, and I think that we will need to adopt to new changes and new whatever technology develops and how that is used and misused. So this is a good reason to come back in many forms to discuss these issues. But is there anything that you would like to raise before we end? Because I promised you that we would end by 11 here. So anything you would like to highlight before we end this event?
Add one thing, and that is that we should not forget the legislative part, and that we actually, to some extent, have different legislation. We need to discuss the effects of having that differences in legislation, even within the EU. Because if we don't handle that, we're going to have problems sooner or later. And perhaps we need to discuss even the principle of openness in Sweden when it comes to research.
Thank you. Albin.
I think, I mean, the threats that we face, they are real. And we have cyber attacks and disinformation, misuse of sensitive technologies, etc. But the answer can't be to close down. It really is to act proportionally, to protect academic freedom, and also be an example of how we want to cooperate internationally from our side with openness and transparency, and most importantly, building trust, because you know, it's just when things are difficult internationally, then researchers and scientists and academia has a special role to play when it comes to keeping communication lanes open and providing ways of talking to each other over difficult borders.
No, absolutely. But then, of course, we also need to be careful about the weaponization of research and innovation from certain actors, of course. But I agree with you. Without this international collaboration, there's no innovation. I mean, and I think this will be one of the challenges United States is facing now, because it's been an innovation hub for such a long time. But now when they make it more difficult for a lot of the foreign scholars to enter, it's probably going to be problematic to maintain that innovation. But maybe that's an opportunity for Europe to step in, and hopefully we will have much more sort of innovation hubs here in Europe that could lead this forward. And I think it is very important. Without the international cooperation, we will lose the innovation. But how do we maintain that innovation with the researchers and with within the national, call it innovation sovereignty? That is a very open question. But as I said, I think we will have many more opportunities to come back to this and continue the discussion. So With this, I would like to thank you for being the two first speakers in this series, and hopefully we will continue having this interaction. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.